Hello everybody and welcome back to the show. My apologies for not having any video for this podcast episode. I'm still working through the kinks of getting this new studio up and running. So the next few episodes will be audio only, but I'm working on making the audio better first because I think that's one of the most important things. But be that as it may, I've got a great show for you today. Today I'm going to be talking about the art of intentional consumption. This is something that the internet's creative director, Oren John, talks about a lot. If you don't know who Oren is, he is a content creator and talks a lot about creative direction and how we can all be better creatives in our lives. The art of intentional consumption, is not something that's all too new. We're all consuming all the time, but we're not necessarily consuming with intention. Or, to use the name of this podcast, we're not consuming by design. We consume based on what the algorithm feeds us. We're not necessarily looking for inspiration or things that we might be able to use in our lives or in our creative endeavors. We are literally just slaves to the algorithm. But it doesn't need to be that way. I think it's just a mindset shift. And this is something that I try to remind myself of quite a lot. I'm as susceptible as anyone else to mindlessly scrolling through the chasms of Instagram and TikTok, to be fair. But we don't need to do that. We can consume intentionally. And that can purely be, instead of consuming the feed, why don't we look at our saved? Why don't we look at the things that we've saved for a later date that never comes around? For example, this is something that I try to remind myself to do fairly frequently. And the idea or the aspects of whatever it is that you saved that resonated with you will probably come to the surface again as we revisit them. And it plants seeds for us to have more creative ideas and to have better creative ideas. And we might have more context that we've lived through in our life to then add to that idea. So that's just one example of consuming content with intention. But we can also try to tell the algorithm the kinds of things that we want. I think that this is akin to going to the supermarket, if you bear with me for this metaphor. So if we're on a diet, it's very difficult to diet if you're going to the supermarket every single day because you're constantly given the option of eating the foods that aren't so good for you. Whereas if you only go to the supermarket like once or twice a week, then you only need to be disciplined once or twice a week, really. And I think the same can be true when we're consuming content. In a way, we can tell the algorithm the things that we want. On Instagram, for sure, I know that you can go to the explore page, and if you hold down on any piece of content, you can say not interested. So the algorithm is learning about you through your habits, for sure, but you can also communicate with it. And then you can intentionally like and comment on and share the kinds of content that you do want to keep seeing, that does inspire you. Obviously, you can unfollow and mute accounts that don't do that as well, or even block if you're feeling really beefy. So these are just examples that future-proof us against mindless consumption, because we're all going to do it. It's inevitable, but we can increase the value of that mindless consumption. And this is really important. You know, there are so many authors, I read quite a lot. There are so many authors who have spoken about this. Last year, Sahil Bloom, he released a book called The 5 Types of Wealth, which I absolutely love. And he was paraphrasing the author of Atomic Habits, James Clear, essentially saying that everything that we create is downstream from something we consume. Everything you create is downstream from something you consume. So we need to make sure that what it is that we consume is high quality and resonates with us, in order to create things that are high quality and that resonate, right? And Sahil Bloom, he goes on to talk about how consumption time focuses on quality upstream to ensure quality downstream. So he encourages setting aside specific times for us to consume content, but for us to consume intentionally and for us to focus on the quality of that consumption, right? And the examples of this that he gives are reading and listening and studying. It doesn't need to be on social media, although I think social media actually gets a bad rep. I think it's a very rich source of inspiration, especially in my industry. I'm always looking on social media, including like Pinterest and Instagram and Cosmos and all of these different places for inspiration. But you can find inspiration anywhere. I've said this before, inspiration can be found anywhere. It just needs to see you working. You just need to be intentional, and then you can see inspiration everywhere. It's abundant. But it's probably useful for us to set aside times for this consumption so that we don't do it so mindlessly. It's all about trying to move away from mindless consumption of stuff that actually doesn't help us at all. And it's about being focused. It's about having concentrated attention on what it is that we're doing. So in this way, we can consider consuming content or consuming intentionally as something that we need to be focused on. We need to be focused. We need to have a goal. We need to know what it is that we're looking for. And that produces the most amount of leverage for the creative work that we're trying to do. Cal Newport has spoken about this a lot as well. He is all for deep work. He's actually against social media, but he talks about different ways that we can really delve into the nuts and bolts and into the meat of what it is that we're trying to achieve. And I'd really recommend reading his book, Deep Work. He talks about deep work against shallow work. Shallow work is non-cognitively demanding logistical style tasks, often performed while distracted. A lot of the time we use social media to distract ourselves. I think about using social media when commuting, for example, but it doesn't need to be like that. We can be more intentional when consuming, and we can look for very specific inspiration or look for very specific pieces of media that can elevate us. One very rich source of this kind of media is Substack. Substack is full of amazing articles from very talented writers, which have paid huge dividends in the way that I see the world, in the way that I think about things, in the way that I think about life in general, and all sorts of different aspects of life. So would recommend Substack, but it doesn't need to be limited to that. As I said, I think inspiration. I think Instagram and TikTok get a really negative rep, and I don't really think that's warranted. A lot of this is just about knowing how valuable our time is and trying to leverage our time as heavily as possible, as much as possible. We need to pull the biggest lever to get the most out of the time that we are inputting. And a lot of the time we are pulling on quite a short lever, to put it bluntly, and it's not paying off any dividends. All sources of media, whether it's Instagram, TikTok, Substack, or the thickest, densest encyclopedia that you can find, they all have value and they can all provide value to us. We just need to be intentional in thinking about that. And it does use cognitive effort, but that's important. And we need to be ready to receive that. And this can be why social media, for example, is draining, because we're just wasting our brain's attention on things that don't matter, but things that might make us angry or make us feel strong negative emotions. Really, we'd be better served either recovering and filling our cup, to use the metaphor, or if our cup's already full, then let's make sure that we are pulling the biggest lever possible to make the most of the time that we have. It's very simple. It's very simple. So I'm all for consumption. I'm all for social media, funnily enough. But I think we need to make it work for us rather than us work for it. And that's all about being intentional. And it's all about using it by design. And that's my rant. I hope everyone is doing well. Once again, apologies for the audio only podcast. I'm hoping that in the next week or so, I'll be back up and running with video. But either way, I really appreciate you for listening to this podcast. Please let me know what you think. Please let me know what you'd like to hear going forward. All of the podcasts that I've done, they're all on Spotify and Apple Music, so you can find them there. And they're also on YouTube. So please, if you haven't already, go take a look at those and let me know what you think. And until the next one, thank you very much for listening, and I will see you then.